We all remember the Cold War's tension on the surface, the missile silos, the space race, and the Berlin Wall. But beneath the waves, an equally critical, silent struggle was waged. In the dark, crushing depths, entire crews lived for months on forgotten vessels, hunting an enemy they couldn't see. Tonight, let's submerge ourselves into this quiet, overlooked world of the Cold War's sleeping submarines. The year was 1983. On the surface, the world was a place of bright, sharp-edged anxieties. It was a world of grainy television news reports, of political speeches, of protests, and of the ever-present noisy tension between two global superpowers. But here, 800 feet beneath the permanent frozen expanse of the Arctic Circle, that world was a distant theoretical thing. Here the world was governed by profound, deep, and unending quiet. This was the silent domain of the USS Vanguard, a Sturgeon-class fast-attack submarine. She was a vessel not of dramatic action, but of immense monastic patience. The Vanguard and her sisters in the deep were the forgotten sentinels of the Cold War. Their mission was not to fight, but to prevent, to exist, unseen, as a quiet and constant deterrent. They moved through a world without sun, without weather, and in any natural sense, without time. Life aboard this submarine was a meticulously engineered reality, a self-contained universe encased in 300 feet of high-tensile steel. The most fundamental concept of human life, the day, was gone. In its place was an invention. The boat ran on a rigid 18-hour cycle, a day created by the needs of the machinery and the 107 men who served it. This cycle was divided into 3 sections, 6 hours on watch, 12 hours off. For 6 hours you were at your post, your mind focused entirely on your specific vital task. For the next 12, you were expected to perform maintenance, conduct training exercises, eat and find a way to sleep, regardless of what your body's internal clock might be telling you. This rigid schedule was the only barrier against a complete descent into a single, blurred, continuous night. Perhaps the most defining quality of this life was the air. No one on the Vanguard had breathed fresh, cold, wind-swept air in over 40 days. The atmosphere they shared was a precious, manufactured commodity. Giant scrubbers in the engineering spaces hummed day and night, using a chemical called amine to filter the carbon dioxide exhaled by the crew. Nearby, an oxygen generator, a large electrolysis unit, quietly split desalinated water into hydrogen and oxygen, bleeding the life-giving O2 back into the boat's atmosphere. The result was an air that had its own unique metallic tang. It was a complex aroma, the smell of the boat that every submariner knew. It was a mixture of the faint ozone from the complex electronics, the sharp chemical scent of the scrubbers, the warm clean oil from the engine room, and the ever-present, comforting smell of coffee and frying food from the galley. It was the smell of life recycled. Just as the air was manufactured, so was the light. There was no dawn or dusk. Time was marked by the thunk of a light switch. For 12 hours of the 18-hour cycle, the ship's narrow corridors and compartments were lit by sterile, shadowless, white fluorescent bulbs. This was day. Then a switch would be thrown, and the entire boat, save for the bright working spaces, would be plunged into a dim, pervasive red light. This was night. This red light was a practical matter. It was meant to preserve the night vision of the men in the control room and the attack center. In the unlikely event they had to surface in the dark. But for the rest of the crew it was a biological signal, a strange, artificial twilight that told their bodies it was time to sleep. For Sonarman Second Class Michael Ears Riley, the world had shrunk to the size of his headphones. He was 21 years old, but he carried himself with the deliberate, unhurried calm of a much older man. His day was spent in the sonar shack, a small dark compartment filled with the quiet thermal hum of electronics. He sat on a padded stool, his entire reality contained in the green glowing phosphorus of his console screens. His job was not to find war. His job was to listen to the peace. He wore his headphones like a second skin, and his mind was submerged in an acoustic world. He listened to the ocean sleeping. There was first the sound of the boat itself, the constant low-frequency hum of the ventilation system, the steady background thrum of the massive turbines turning steam from the silent nuclear reactor into propulsion. These were the house sounds, and their presence was a comfort. It meant the boat was alive. Then there were the sounds of the deep. He listened to the ice pack miles above them, groaning and cracking under its own immense weight, a sound like an old faraway house settling, or the slow, lazy thunder of a distant summer storm. He heard the constant, gentle static of millions of tiny shrimp, a sound so pervasive that sonarmen called it sea-floor rain. And sometimes, cutting through the hiss, a new sound would emerge, building from an almost imperceptible vibration into something so profound it seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his chest. It was the long, mournful and impossibly low-frequency call of a fin whale, a biological, navigating the dark by its own ancient sonar. Riley would pause, watching the green line spike on his waterfall display, and feel a strange sense of companionship. They were not, after all, the only living things in this darkness. His job was to distinguish these natural sounds from the unnatural ones. The high-pitched whine of another submarine's turbines, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a propeller, the terrifying sharp ping of an active sonar. Those were the sounds of the hunt. But the ocean was vast, and for now it was quiet. At the end of his 6 hours, Riley felt a hand on his shoulder. His relief, Sonarman Petty Officer First Class Gator Davis was standing behind him. "My watch ears," Gator whispered. The sonar shack was always kept library quiet. "It's all yours, Gator," Riley murmured back, unplugging his headphones. The sudden silence in his ears was almost jarring. It's been quiet. Just the ice and some biologicals on the port beam, bearing 290. All logged. "She's all yours. Roger that. Go get some rack." Riley stood, stretching his back, his muscles stiff. He stepped out of the shack into the corridor, and the world was red. Night had begun. He moved down the narrow passageway, his soft-soled shoes making no sound on the tiled deck. He passed the crew's mess. It was the social heart of the boat, but now it was subdued. Under a single focused pool of white light, a few men from the off-watch section were playing a quiet game of acey-deucey, their low conversation a barely audible murmur. On a small television bolted to the bulkhead, a worn-out VHS tape of MASH was playing, its tinny laugh track muted. He stopped by the galley window. The cooks, who worked almost constantly to feed the 3 different watch sections, were cleaning up. One of them saw him and slid a slider, a small greasy hamburger, and a carton of milk onto the sill. "Thanks, Cookie," Riley said. "Don't mention it, Ears. Sleep well." He took his small meal and moved on past the sleeping quarters until he reached his own. He found his bunk, a narrow coffin-like space, the middle of 3 stacked vertically. He slid onto the thin mattress and pulled the dark blue privacy curtain, sealing himself in. This small act was a precious ritual. This 72 by 24-inch space was the only private property he had in the world. He lay back in the dark, the small burger in his hand, and he listened. The sounds were different now. He could hear the muffled, distant hum of the ventilation system. He could feel, rather than hear, the deep, steady vibration of the turbines through his mattress. He heard the faint creak of the hull, adjusting to the immense crushing pressure of the sea. These were the sounds of his world working correctly. They were the sounds of safety, the lullabies of the deep. In this long recycled day, 800 feet below the ice, Sonarman Riley closed his eyes and, like the great ocean around him, fell fast asleep. The end of a recycled day was signaled by a simple mechanical click. In the narrow curtained darkness of his bunk, Sonarman Michael Riley felt the vibration of the ventilation system more than he heard it. He was in a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that only comes from true sensory deprivation. A shipmate, moving silently in soft-soled shoes, paused at his rack and gently shook the mattress frame. "Ears, it's 0430. Time for watch." Riley was awake instantly, but his movements were slow, automatic. He pulled back the dark blue curtain. The corridor was bathed in the dim, artificial twilight of the nighttime red lamps. The air, as always, tasted flat and metallic, heavy with scrubbed carbon dioxide and the faint, oily scent of the engineering spaces. This was morning on the USS Vanguard. He swung his legs out, his feet hitting the cold deck tiles. He dressed in the dark, his uniform, a simple blue work jumpsuit, feeling cool against his skin. He moved through the submarine, a ghost in a ship of ghosts. The boat was in its quietest phase. The off-watch crew was asleep, and the on-watch crew was deep in the rhythm of their duties. His first stop was the galley, the small stainless steel heart of the boat. The cooks, who operated in a near-constant state of preparation, were already making breakfast for the next watch rotation. The smell of frying potatoes and strong black coffee cut through the boat's sterile aroma. "Morning, Cookie," Riley murmured, pouring a cup of coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. "Morning, Ears," the cook replied, not looking up from a massive metal bowl of what would eventually become scrambled eggs. "Heard it's quiet out there." "It always is," Riley said, taking a sip. The coffee was scalding hot and impossibly bitter, but it was a familiar, grounding ritual. He made his way forward. Passing the empty crew's mess, the card tables wiped clean, the small television screen dark. He climbed a short ladder to the operations level and entered the sonar shack. The change was immediate. He left the red-lit corridor and entered a space of near-total darkness, illuminated only by the cool green-black glow of the sonar consoles. Petty Officer First Class Gator Davis was leaning forward, his headphones on, his eyes tracing the slow cascading lines of the waterfall display. For a full minute, Riley simply stood behind him, letting his own eyes adjust to the dim light, his mind shifting from the sleepy haze of the bunk to the sharp focus of the watch. Finally, Gator sensed him, pulling one side of his headphones back. "My watch," Riley said softly. "Who got it, Ears?" Gator whispered, stretching his arms. "It's as quiet as it gets. Ice is popping up north and the shrimp are loud, but that's it. No transients, no mechanicals. The ocean's asleep." "Roger that, they did the Sonarman's ritual." Riley plugged his own headphones into the console. Gator pointed out the active settings, the filters he had been using, and the faint, ghostly green lines on the screen that he had classified as biologicals, whales and geologicals, the groaning ice pack. "She's all yours, shipmate. I have the watch." Gator slipped out of the shack and Riley settled into the padded stool. He slid the heavy headphones over his ears, and the world outside the submarine vanished. His reality was now composed entirely of sound. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting his brain attune to the symphony of the deep. He heard the familiar, comforting hum of the Vanguard's own machinery, a sound his brain had already learned to filter out. He heard the high-frequency crackle hiss of the seafloor rain, the collective sound of millions of tiny crustaceans, and far, far in the distance, he heard the low-frequency groans of the polar ice. It was the sound of a sleeping world. He spent the first hour in this state of relaxed professional focus. His eyes scanned the waterfall display, watching the new acoustic data paint itself in glowing green lines across the screen. He was listening for one thing, a pattern. Nature was random. Whales and ice were chaotic. Man was not. A machine, a propeller, a turbine, those things were patterns. They were order. And in the deep, order was a threat. It was in the second hour that he first sensed it. It was not a sound. It was an absence of sound. He frowned, leaning closer to his console. There was a section of his display on the port quarter that seemed blank. The usual hiss of the ocean was being slightly, almost imperceptibly, muffled. It was a baffle, a dead spot in his own sonar array, but it seemed to be moving. No, that wasn't right. The sound was there, but it was so low, so faint, that it was almost below the threshold of the equipment. He began his work. His fingers moved over the console, engaging a series of digital filters isolating the bearing. He strained, turning up the gain until the hiss of the ocean was a roar in his ears, and then he heard it. It was not a propeller. It was not a turbine whine. It was not a tap. It was a tone, a single, pure, incredibly low-frequency tone. It was a note, a hum, but one so deep it was almost a vibration, like a single massive bass string being plucked miles away, its sound traveling through the cold, dense water. He watched his screen. A new razor-thin green line was painting itself on the display. It was steady. It was artificial. "Con sonar," he said, his voice calm but with a new sharp edge. "I have a new contact bearing 210. Classify as Sierra 1. A single pure tone transmission at an extremely low frequency." In the control room, the officer of the deck, a young lieutenant, turned. "Sonar, Con, aye. What is its signature?" "Con sonar, that's the problem. It has no signature. No modulation, no propeller noise, no pumps. Just the tone. It's a ghost. A ghost." In sonar terms, it was the most puzzling thing a man could find. It was a contact that was clearly artificial, yet gave no clue as to its identity or purpose. The lieutenant's quiet voice was heard in the shack. "Sonar, Con, report all changes. I'm informing the captain." For the next hour, the sonar shack became the center of the Submarines universe. The captain, a quiet, solid man named Hackett, entered the shack, filling the small space. He didn't speak. He just pointed to a spare set of headphones. Riley patched him in. The captain listened, his eyes on the screen for a full 5 minutes. The thin green line held steady. "It's pacing us," the captain said, his voice a low rumble. "Yes, sir," Riley replied. "It's holding a steady bearing and range. It's been there for an hour. It's just listening, I think." "It's not one of ours," the captain stated. It wasn't a question. "No, sir. The frequency doesn't match any known NATO asset. It was a Soviet. But what kind? A new class of submarine? An unmanned drone?" A listening post dropped on the seafloor. The ghost was a profound, silent question. It was not aggressive. It made no move to find them. It simply shadowed them. A fellow traveler in the abyss. The Cold War, so loud on the surface, was here a game of silent acoustic chess. "Let's see what it's made of," the captain said, his voice still calm. He keyed the ship's intercom. "Helm, Con, make your course 090. All ahead 1/3. Make your depth 850 feet. We're going to see if our friend follows." In the control room, the helmsman repeated the order. The Vanguard's ship's control team began the maneuver. The deck of the submarine tilted almost imperceptibly as the bow planes angled down. A new, slightly deeper hum filled the boat as the turbines spun up, pushing them faster and deeper. In the sonar shack, Riley never took his eyes from the screen. The maneuver was designed to clear the baffles, to turn the boat so that its powerful bow sonar could listen to the blind spot that had been behind them. The turn was slow, graceful. The thin green line of the ghost contact began to move across the screen as their bearing changed. It was real. Then, as they settled on their new course, the ghost did something. The pure, low-frequency tone wavered just for a second, and then faintly Riley heard a new sound. Thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of a large, slow-moving propeller. The ghost was turning too. It was following them. "Con sonar." Riley's voice was electric with quiet discovery. "Sierra 1 is maneuvering. I have propeller modulation. He's turning to follow us, sir. I think he was just drifting before." We woke him up. The captain nodded, a tiny, grim smile on his face. The ghost had shown its hand. It was another submarine. A very, very quiet one. "He's good," the captain murmured. "Very good." He was asleep just like the ocean. He keyed the intercom. "Helm con, resume original course and speed. Let's let him go back to sleep. We know he's there now." The Vanguard turned back to its original patrol path. Riley watched his screen. 10 minutes later, the propeller sounds faded, and the ghost contact resolved back into a single, pure, low-frequency tone. It was shadowing them again. A silent, forgotten partner in the long, cold underwater dance. The acoustic ghost was back, and the recycled day continued, now with the knowledge that they were no longer alone. Apshi, apnar anurod anuyayi. When the ocean slept gulper torti anshti, the slow cold chase shironame. Ikti shant obernamut bangite naisdioyahlo. Part 3, the slow cold chase. The discovery of the acoustic ghost did not send the USS Vanguard into a state of alarm. There were no clanging bells, no shouts, no one running through the corridors. Instead, a new kind of quiet settled over the boat. A quiet that was heavier, more focused, and electric with purpose. The 107-man crew, already a community of professionals, simply sharpened their senses. The long recycled day of the patrol had just been given a new, singular focus. In the sonar shack, Michael Riley remained on his stool, his headphones a permanent fixture. His 12 hours off were now spent in a state of restless half-sleep in his bunk, his mind still attuned to the hum of the boat, waiting for his next watch. He, like the captain and like the ghost itself, was now hunting. But this was a hunt unlike any other. It was not a chase of speed, but of patience. It was not a battle of weapons, but of mathematics and sound. It was a slow cold chase, an agonizingly methodical game of chess played in 3 dimensions, in total darkness, by 2 opponents who could only hear the faintest echoes of each other's movements. The ghost, designated Sierra 1, had resumed its passive, listening state. The single, pure, low-frequency tone was all it gave. It was a whisper, a signature so faint that Captain Hackett believed it was intentional. The Soviet sub wasn't hiding. It was loitering. It was a sentinel just like them. "It's a new class of boat," Captain Hackett murmured. He was standing in the attack center, just outside the sonar shack. This was the submarine's nerve center, a compartment of glowing green consoles and tactical displays, all bathed in the dim, functional red light of the ship's night cycle. "It's too quiet to be a Victor 3, he continued, speaking to his executive officer. "He was dead in the water when we found him, just drifting with the current, listening. That single tone, it's probably just his primary reactor coolant pump, isolated on a sound-damping raft. It's incredible engineering." There was a quiet, professional respect in his voice. The men of the Vanguard were proud, but they were not arrogant. They knew they were not the only masters of the deep. "But now," the captain said, turning to the plotting table, "we need to know what he is. We need his full acoustic signature. And to get that, we have to make him do something. We have to make him react. This began the chase. The first step was to build a complete picture of their silent partner. This task fell to the fire control technicians, the FTs, who worked at the consoles in the attack center. Their job was to take the single piece of information Sonarman Riley could provide, a bearing, a simple line of sound, and turn it into a solution. They were performing TMA, or target motion analysis. It was a patient intellectual art. The Vanguard itself was the key. By moving, it could create a new angle on the target. "Helm con," the captain ordered. "Make your course 180. All ahead 1/3. Course 180, all ahead 1/3, aye, sir," the helmsman replied. The Vanguard began a long, slow, graceful turn to the south. In the sonar shack, Riley watched the thin green line of the Ghost signal begin to drift across his screen. "Khan sonar, Sierra 1 is drifting. Bearing 235. Bearing 240. He called out the new bearings, and in the attack center a technician made a new pencil mark on the glowing plot. A new line was drawn. Then, after 30 minutes, the captain ordered another turn. "Helmcon, make your course 120. Another turn. Another set of bearings from Riley. Another line on the plot. Where the lines intersected, that was the Ghost. It was trigonometry, performed in the ocean's darkness. After 2 hours of this slow, methodical box pattern, they had a solution. "Captain, we have a firm track," the FT supervisor reported, his voice low. "Target is at a range of 20,000 yards, course 000, speed 0. He's dead in the water again, sir. He's just letting us draw circles around him." The Ghost knew exactly what they were doing. It was so confident in its own silence that it simply sat there and let them track it. It was a gesture of supreme, quiet arrogance. "He's good," Hackett said, a grim smile touching his lips. "He's telling us he knows we're here and he doesn't care. He's telling us we can't touch him." He paused, thinking. "Very well. If he won't come to us, we'll go to him." The slow, cold chase now entered its second, more delicate phase. "Helmcon, all ahead 2/3. Make your course 210. Bring us to a range of 5,000 yards. Sonar, I want all acoustic data. I want to hear this thing breathe." The Vanguard came alive. The hum of the turbines deepened, a sound and feeling that resonated through the entire hull. They were moving deliberately toward the contact. This was the submarine equivalent of walking slowly across a dark room toward a man you know is there, just to see if he flinches. 4,000 yards. 3,000. The Vanguard slipped through the water, a ghost hunting a ghost. In the sonar shack, Riley was filtering every possible frequency. The single low-frequency tone was louder now, a solid, unwavering note in his headphones. "Con sonar, 2,000 yards. Bearing steady. He's not moving, sir. He's just waiting." This was the height of the Cold War. 2 nuclear-armed vessels, representing the entire military might of their respective nations, were now less than a mile apart, suspended in the dark, and neither was moving. The silence was absolute. The recycled air in the shack felt thick, heavy. Riley could hear his own slow heartbeat. "Captain," the XO said, his voice a dry whisper, "this is unconventional." "He's unconventional," Hackett replied. "He's waiting for us to make a mistake. He wants our signature." The Vanguard drifted, its own forward momentum bleeding off. The 2 submarines were now in a strange, silent standoff. They sat there for an hour, 2 hours. The clock on the bulkhead was the only thing that moved. The 18-hour day continued. Riley was relieved by Gator, and then, 6 hours later, returned to the watch. And the Ghost was still there, a mile off the port bow, humming its single, defiant note. This was the nature of the slow, cold chase. It was a battle of will, of patience, of who had the steadier nerve. On the 30th hour of the standoff, Captain Hackett finally made his move. It was not an aggressive one, but a brilliant one. "Helm con, all astern 1/3. The command was shocking. A submarine moving backward is loud, ungainly, and cavitates, creating a massive disturbance as the propeller churns the water in reverse. The Vanguard shuddered. A groaning, churning noise filled the ocean as the screw bit the water. In the sonar shack, Riley's screens flooded with the green light of their own noise. They were for a moment completely blind and deaf. It was a calculated gamble. The captain was making a loud noise on purpose. They moved backward for 60 seconds, then the order came. "Helm con, all stop." The Vanguard went silent again, drifting. The effect on the Ghost was immediate. The sudden, violent noise of the Vanguard's reverse bell had startled it. "Con, sonar." Riley's voice was sharp, electric. "Sierra 1 is maneuvering. I have propeller noise. He's turning fast. He's cavitating." The Ghost had flinched. Thinking the Vanguard was attacking, or perhaps just startled by the sudden, inexplicable noise, the Soviet captain had ordered his own maneuver. His submarine in its quick turn had made a mistake. Its propeller, spinning too fast in the cold, dense water, had cavitated. It had created tiny, collapsing air bubbles, which produced a unique, rattling, roaring sound. It was the acoustic equivalent of a fingerprint. "Record," Hackett said simply. In the shack, Riley's fingers were already flying, ensuring the magnetic tape recorders were capturing every millisecond of the sound. They had it. The cavitation signature, the propeller type, the number of blades. The chase was over. The entire engagement had lasted 48 hours. The total distance covered was less than 20 miles. The only weapon fired was a burst of sound. As quickly as it had appeared, the Soviet propeller noise vanished. The Ghost, realizing its error, went silent again. Then the single low-frequency hum returned. But it was fainter now, and it was moving away. "Con sonar, Sierra 1 is widening. He's heading north, back into the ice pack. He's leaving." The acoustic Ghost, its anonymity compromised, was retreating. The slow, cold chase had been won. Captain Hackett came into the sonar shack. He stood behind Riley, listening to the fading hum in the spare set of headphones. "Good work, sonar man," he said, his voice low and calm. "Thank you, sir," Riley replied. "I've just given Naval Intelligence a new chapter for their books." The captain left. Riley leaned back, pulling his headphones off. The silence in the shack was, for the first time in 2 days, just silence. The long recycled day of the patrol could now truly resume. The slow cold chase had lasted less than 3 days, but its memory resonated through the remainder of the patrol. The acoustic Ghost had vanished, slipping back into the deep frozen silence beneath the polar ice cap. With its departure, the palpable electric tension that had sharpened the senses of all 107 men bled away, replaced once again by the profound, monastic quiet of the mission. The USS Vanguard resumed its patient, invisible work. The 18-hour recycled day reasserted its comforting, monotonous rhythm. In the sonar shack, Michael Ears Riley returned to his vigil. His headphones, once a tool of pursuit, were again a listening post for the ocean's sleep. The thin, green, man-made line on his waterfall display was gone. In its place, the familiar, chaotic, and natural sounds of the deep returned. He heard the groaning, lazy thunder of the ice pack, miles to the north. He heard the ever-present hiss of the sea-floor rain. The pods of whales, with their long, vibrating calls, returned, and he logged them with the quiet affection of a man hearing a familiar bird song. Life on the boat settled. In the crew's mess, the quiet, murmuring card games resumed. In the narrow curtained bunks, men returned to their dog-eared paperbacks. Their minds, once coiled for a silent acoustic battle, now unspooling into stories of faraway places. The long recycled day continued, one after another, marked only by the thunk of the red and white light switches and the meticulous entries in the ship's log. The Vanguard and its crew had once again been forgotten by the world. Then, on the 87th day of their patrol, something new entered the ocean's acoustic symphony. It was not a sound, but a whisper, a signal so faint it was more a feeling than a noise. It was an extremely low frequency or ELF transmission. It was a long, slow-coded message, penetrating the hundreds of feet of water and ice to find them. It was a signal from the outside. The message was decoded, and a new quiet energy began to thrum through the boat. It was a current of anticipation, subtle as the ELF signal itself. A few hours later, the captain's voice came over the 1C, the ship-wide address system. His voice was, as always, calm, low and professional, yet no one missed the warmth in his tone. "Men, this is the captain. We have received our orders. Our patrol is complete. We are heading for the barn." A barn in submariner language was home. There was no cheering. There was no celebration. There was simply a collective, silent, internal smile. The long watch was over. In the control room, the officer of the deck gave the new course. "Helm, make your course 1905. All ahead 2/3. The Vanguard, for the first time in 3 months, made a decisive turn south. She was leaving the ice and the cold and the silence behind. The journey home was a long, submerged transit. For another week, the crew saw no sun. They remained a ghost, moving unseen through the deep Atlantic. But the feeling inside the boat was entirely different. This was no longer a patrol. It was a decommissioning of the mind. Men began to talk about the outside. They spoke of small, simple things. The smell of fresh-cut grass, the taste of a real, non-reconstituted glass of milk, the feeling of rain on their faces. They began to shave more carefully. They meticulously packed their few belongings, folding their blue jumpsuits with a sense of finality. The boat itself prepared for its return to the surface. A field day was called. This was not a celebration, but a top-to-bottom, stem-to-stern cleaning of the entire submarine. Every bulkhead was scrubbed, every piece of brass polished, every deck tile waxed. They were erasing the evidence of their long, isolated life, preparing their steel home to be seen, to be judged by the fresh eyes of the surface world. They were preparing to rejoin the human race. Then, on the 94th day, the Vanguard reached the familiar shallow waters of the American coast. The order that everyone had been waiting for finally came. Man the con, rig for surface. The control room, which had been a place of relaxed transit, became a space of quiet, focused intensity. The captain, the XO, and the ship's control party took their stations. "Helmsman, make your depth 6-5 feet, the captain ordered. 6-5 feet, aye, sir," the plainsman replied, his hands on the yoke. The deck tilted up, a gentle climbing angle. The digital depth gauge began to tick down. "Passing 200 feet, 150 feet. Raise the number 1 scope," the captain said. The gleaming periscope hissed up from its well in the deck. The captain bent to the eyepiece, his hands on the handles. He was, for the first time in 3 months, seeing the world. He made a slow 360-degree sweep, his body turning with the instrument. No contacts near or far. Horizon is clear. He looked up, his eyes seeming to adjust to a new reality. "Surface, surface, surface. Surface, 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 aye, sir," the helmsman repeated. "Below all main ballast tanks." The effect was instantaneous and violent. A deafening, shuddering roar filled the boat as 3,000-pound compressed air blasted the water from the ballast tanks. The Vanguard, suddenly buoyant, surged upward. The men in the control room grabbed stanchions to steady themselves. The boat groaned, shivered, and then, with a final lurching motion, broke free. She was on the surface, clamshell open, the XO reported. "Man the bridge," the captain ordered. The lookouts and the captain undogged the heavy, watertight hatch at the base of the conning tower and began the long, vertical climb up the narrow ladder. Michael Riley, as part of the topside watch team, was right behind them. He climbed, his hand on the cold rungs. Above him, he saw a circle of light so bright, so intense, it hurt his eyes. It was not the green of his sonar screen or the red of the ship's night. It was blue. He stepped out of the hatch and onto the small exposed bridge, and his senses were assaulted. The smell. It was the first thing that hit him. It wasn't the sterile, recycled, metallic air of the boat. It was the world. It was an explosion of salt, of dampness, of fish, of distant diesel exhaust, and of a clean, wet wind that he'd forgotten existed. It was so rich, so real, it made him dizzy. And the light. The sky was a vast, aching, impossible blue. The sun, which he had only known as a concept, was a ball of actual fire, and its warmth on his face was a feeling so alien, so powerful, he had to close his eyes. He looked out. The Vanguard was no longer a silent hunter. She was just a boat, a long black curved shape, moving through the grey-green swells of the Atlantic. He heard a sound, a sharp, chaotic crying sound. He flinched, his hand instinctively moving toward his headphones before he realized what it was. Seagulls. They were crying and wheeling in the air. The sound was random and loud and beautiful. He was joined by other men, their faces pale, almost translucent. They were like monks emerging from a 90-day meditation. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. They just stood on the deck, their hands on the rail, letting the wind and the sun hit their faces. They were breathing. They were surfacing to a world that had in 90 days completely forgotten them, and which they in turn had almost forgotten. An hour later, the Vanguard steamed into the familiar channel of the Thames River, heading for the submarine base in Groton, Connecticut. As they rounded the bend, they saw them. The families, hundreds of people on the pier, waving small American flags. The forgotten submarine and its forgotten crew had returned. Riley stood on the deck in his dress blue uniform, his hands behind his back. He watched the pier grow closer. In his mind, he could still hear the deep, cold quiet of the Arctic. He could hear the whale songs. And he could hear the faint, single, pure-tone hum of the acoustic ghost, a fellow traveler in a war that was fought in the dark. That world was already fading. It was becoming a story. The oceans, he knew, were still sleeping, but he was for now awake.